Hello, this is a video response to Philo71, the video he entitled 4 Atheistic Fallacies That Flood YouTube. They're not fallacies. I'm just going to go through them one by one. Fallacy number 1. God equals Santa, Tooth Fairy, Easter Bunny. Atheists don't use this argument to prove that God doesn't exist. It's an explanation of why we don't believe and why you shouldn't, under the assumption that the story and ideas of God is seen as a fantasy just as those other stories are. You're distinguishing God from the Tooth Fairy by claiming he is a creator, while the Tooth Fairy is not, is irrelevant to the argument in the same way that distinguishing the Tooth Fairy from Santa Claus is irrelevant. We don't believe in any of them because we think the stories are myths in all cases, regardless of the details of each myth. We atheists don't claim they are exactly the same, except in their status of real-world manifestation. Believers have a ridiculously poor grasp of and have difficulty relating to what the atheist philosophy is. Drawing the analogy between the Tooth Fairy and God is meant to, as succinctly as possible, give the believer an instantaneous idea of what the atheist philosophy is all about. Any believer who can successfully see this analogy will be able to understand atheism. If you think it's a logical fallacy, then what is really going on here is you simply don't understand atheism. So, you also performed a conflation by adding Thor and the flying spaghetti argument, spaghetti monster to the argument. We atheists usually use a different argument when we're invoking those. In other words, we split it up a bit. We usually include Allah, Yahweh, Shiva, Zeus, Wotan, and others in an argument about equivalent incredulity. In this argument, we state that the Christian God is no more believable than these other gods, since all the positive arguments that support the Christian God have existing equivalents for these other gods and their religions. But these gods are all contradictory of each other. So no positive argument can be satisfactory so long as it does not successfully and credibly distinguish itself in the details of the particular God theory. That is to say, you have to include some bits about speaking in tongues or prayer or confession or your virtual cannibalism with communion and so on. Otherwise, your positive arguments will be just as effective in proving the contradictory gods, even long dead ones such as Quetzalcoatl. A well-formed atheist argument will usually draw a distinction between these two ideas, since the first one is just an explanation of why we lack a belief in God. It's just an explanation of why. And the second is an explanation of why we don't believe any of your supporting arguments. So you then cited the quote that I just believe in one less God than you. This is not a fallacy or an error in any way. It's just used to apply to the sort of second line of explanation when we're just talking about comparing various gods, not the first, because we don't think Santa Claus is God or anything like that. That's not what we're trying to say. The idea that we believe in one less God is an accurate depiction of the status of our respective beliefs. So long as the believers are monotheistic, we are atheists, and so we believe in exactly one less God. That's just the way it is. There's no grounds or reasons for disputing this very simple statement by either side. And then you brought up this sort of ridiculous analogy that a car designer it's not Thor or something like that, but that's ridiculous because there's no dispute about who's designing the car. We can watch an engineer make or design a car. It's not analogous because it's a completely accountable and credible and examinable process. So fallacy number 2, who created God, apparently, is our second fallacy. But this is just an argument meant as a response to an argument. Well, it's a response to the following argument. The universe is too complicated to have been created by natural processes and therefore must have had a creator. So if we just use that one sentence argument, then it's relying just on the complexity to require a creator. And if that's the case, then, well, God is at least as complicated as the universe, therefore it too must have a creator. That's really where that argument is used. Remember, we atheists don't believe in God, so a lot of our arguments seem like ridiculous questions. This is a method called reductio ad absurdum, or proof by contradiction. It's not that we believe any of the premises inherent in the question. It's that the question itself becomes credible and arises exactly in response to the believer's explanation about the existence of God. You attempted to give an argument about the existence of God in order to wipe this argument out without noting the context that the argument's used in. Nevertheless, it's easy to dispatch your so-called proof, so let's go over it. You claim there are 3 universal premises. To be universal, that means they must be reasonably accepted by nearly everyone with basic understanding of the context. That isn't the case, and I'll just go through them. Your first premise was that everything that begins has a cause. Okay, well, we need to adjust this in this case. Assuming there is time before the current time, then all states have a pre-state. Okay, so this is fine as long as we have this proviso about having prior time. Of course, this proviso is generally never an issue, except it becomes so here because of how you're using it. So your second supposed universal premise is that the universe began to exist. Now you whip by this one as quickly as possible, of course, because this is ridiculous. It's completely speculative. This is not in any way a universal premise. To have begun to exist, this would require that it did not exist beforehand. There are problems with this idea so long as we are in the physical universe that contains the law of conservation of energy. That is to say, any pre-state cannot have contained any different amount of total energy plus equivalent mass, and therefore it could not have been in a pre-state that could be considered distinct really from the universe. It would just be in continuum with the universe. You may propose that the laws of physics were different at or before the Big Bang. However, this requires a strong theoretical physics argument, which is hard to motivate and currently not easily addressable by anyone living today except by some truly exceptional experts and specialists. My understanding is that any question about the universe at or before the Big Bang are really open questions in theoretical physics, and for which there's no resolution, no consensus, nor any uncontroversial theories. And so because of that, the universe began to exist is not a universal premise, just because it's not universal. It's entirely speculative. So then the third thing, which you label as a premise, you say, therefore, we must conclude that the universe must have a cause. Okay, obviously you don't know what a premise is. A premise cannot start with the word therefore. The first 2 premises where the first needs a minor adjustment and the second is entirely speculative, those are premises. The third thing would be considered a deduction or a conclusion or something of that nature. Since you've neither established that time existed before the Big Bang and you don't have anything approximating universality in the second, this third premise, which should be a conclusion, but it doesn't follow since the first 2 haven't been established, and thus the third is just vacuous, since the third is supposed to be a conclusion, not a premise. Okay, and you follow up this with a interesting statement in which you just say God does not have a cause for his existence. This doesn't follow from anything you said up until this point, so it's non sequitur and basically an assertion. So if, for example, a believer invokes the argument that anything with complexity requires a creator, which will have a cause for enacting existence, then indeed God both needs a creator and a cause for existence. You can't have your cake and eat it too. So you literally pull the conclusion that God has no cause, or that God always existed, out of thin air. I replayed this part of your video several times, and while I found English words strung together, I didn't find any line of reasoning at all. It's fairly obvious that you had no intention of targeting this video to any objectively thinking person. This conclusion can only be accepted by people who've already believed it beforehand. There was no argument supplied for this claim at all other than simply asserting it. So also you mentioned that this was a fallacy of the third degree. I did not know fallacies came in degrees. What is a fallacy of third degree? I've never heard this before. Okay, on to fallacy number 3. A good God would not allow evil in the world. Again, this is an argument taken out of context, and is usually a narrowly tailored argument against the idea that God is the creator, all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful, all at the same time. So, for example, the way this argument is used is we say that humans have performed so much evil in the world. This evil is essentially derivative of God, since we are his creations. Furthermore, natural disasters are manifestations of evil that has nothing to do with humans, or human motivations or actions, and that the best of us could never commit the kinds of evil that natural disasters do. If God both knows and is capable of stopping or minimizing such evil, he should or must be able to do so to retain the property of being all-loving. That is to say, evil should be just be prevented by him. The upshot of this argument is simply that the record of reality requires that one of the 4 properties, that is, 1, being the creator, 2, all-knowing, 3, all-loving, or 4, all-powerful, must not be correct. One of those has got to be wrong. This is generally the limit of the argument and how it's used. It doesn't stand on its own without the assertion by someone else of these 4 properties, usually a theist. So you responded to this with the free will argument, but that doesn't cover natural disasters or things like accidental death. Also, mentally dysfunctional people who do evil deeds do not necessarily do so as a result of choice or by will, but rather by an inability to correctly make choices relative to what should be predictable consequences. If you don't understand what that means, go rent the movie Of Mice and Men, or read the book, or whatever. Okay, so the free will excuse also ignores the fact that God created this free will. If he's all-powerful and all-knowing, there is nothing this free will can do that wasn't foreseen at the time that God gave it to us. In other words, he still both knows about and is the ultimate cause for any evil that results from the use of free will. This is not a problem so long as we drop the all-loving part, all-loving property of God. I'll refer you to the opening chapter of The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins if you want a more accurate description of what God is. Atheists don't claim God doesn't exist because there's evil in the world. The claim is that a simultaneously all-loving, all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving creator God doesn't exist. The argument is used to demote him, not to prove that he doesn't exist. It is only if this demotion is not acceptable that his non-existence becomes consequential. That there is some God that balances evil, that there's some good that balances evil does not remove the evil, and thus the all-loving property is still not satisfied by that. Besides there being evil, there is a lot of unnecessary evil like natural disasters. Certainly an all-loving God could get rid of those. The relative argument you present, i.e. that good exists as a contrast to evil, it's an interesting one. However, it's unconvincing and does not make the cut for 2 reasons. 1, the claim of all-loving does not admit or allow for these gradations between evil and good, because of the word all in all-loving. 2. As intelligent humans, we have managed to decrease the amount of evil in the world as time has gone by without any divine intervention. That is to say, disease is decreasing, emergency services have become commonplace, the concept of sanitation, nutrition, health and safety, and legal systems that reduce crime, and generally increase standard of living with technology and so on. These all, one way or another, decrease evil. What this means is that humans are more powerful than God with respect to curing the problem of evil, as we're able to reduce it in ways that God never has. So God is either not powerful or not all-loving. Not all-powerful or not all-loving. So you end this section with a plea that we please stop using this deceitful argument. This is a response to a claim, and atheists will generally never take direction or advice on argument from a theist for any reason that I can imagine. Okay, so fallacy number 4. The God of the Old Testament was a murderous, evil, and vengeful God. This is certainly stuff I've heard from other atheists and from people like Richard Dawkins. Personally, I'm a pure atheist who's never been indoctrinated and not too familiar with the details of this genocidal maniac that you call God. I don't know much about Ted Bundy either. It's doubtful that learning these details would either be enlightening or sway my position on the matter. This argument may be derivative of the one that you claim is fallacy number 3. As I don't have any standing on this argument, I don't see the merit of it either way, and so I won't directly defend it from a positive point of view. Remember, I'm an atheist, so telling me that God is a prick is pretty meaningless to me. Okay, but in any event, your counter-argument to Dawkins' now famous description of God appears to be that God has some greater purpose that nullifies this characterization. That is to say, it's okay to kill a lot of people or to impose draconian rules upon them, because in some ends justify the means way, there's a justification to all this. This describes a God who is limited, not one that's all-powerful. Why is God not able to obtain the ends he wants without the introduction of this antisocial behavior on his part? Anyways, that's all I have on that. You end with a final plea again saying, please stop flooding comment boxes with these fallacies. Again, let me assure you that atheists just will not take direction from you for any reason, under any circumstances that I could imagine. Anyway, that's all I had. Do be later.